Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be for the third time in a row. Thanks to you all for getting up to this late hour. But it didn't go. So I will be going counter tendency with respect to my last two presentations in the conferences, and mostly also with respect to all the other presenters up to now, because I will present a very simple model, very simple theoretical model. I will show you all the equations because there are just 20. So this is something I've been working on in the last few months. And actually, this is just the part of my talk. I will give you a very short preamble just to let you know why I started thinking about this problem. And then I will very briefly have a very short intro on open economy and SFC. I mean, the literature and talking about. And then I will introduce this very simple open economy model, which is, I think, it is the simplest model in the literature. And then I will show you some simulation results. So I'll be carrying out simulation and comparison of my model with respect to the other two benchmarks in the literature, which are the chapter 12 of the Godel-Lavoie, the open flex model, simplification of the model that came out in the Review of Political Economy in 2021, which is designed by Emilio Carnevale. And then I will give you some conclusion and the future steps that I'm thinking about doing on this little project of mine. So how I started thinking about this. So last year, so Siena has this very nice tradition of organizing a PhD meeting every year where older students come back to discuss the PhD students of the new board. And so I was asked by a friend to referee the work of this third-year PhD student. So she was not doing a work on stock-flow system models, but only the third chapter. And so she wanted to study, so she's doing a thesis on the currency hierarchies with a focus on South American, Latin American countries. So she wanted to make a stock flow model, an open economy, a small open economy in Latin America that was issuing bonds in both domestic and foreign currency. What she was interested in was the impact of external factors on the domestic economy, such as changes in interest rates or liquidity preference, and so on and so forth. And then she presented me a huge model, over 100 equations, and a very complicated code, which of course was not run. And so I asked her why this complex structure, and she said, no, I was not so much into the literature, so I do what all students do. I went to the Bible of stock-flow stuff, so she went to the Godel-Lavoie. She opened chapter 6, when Godel and Mark introduced the open economy, and here you find that they claim, chapter 6, first page, to study open economy, you must have two countries. Why? Because if you don't have two countries, your system is not complete, and you will not be able to study countries in the state, Japan, the European Union, or other large countries, because you do not take into account the feedback effects from one country to the other, which is okay. But then, is there a different way to do this? Actually, there is. The first one, so the problem with two-country models is that they're very complex. So especially if you're a master's student or a PhD student, you're not that much into this literature, then it becomes challenging to approach the stock flow literature, the stock flow world, if you're not already aware of the problem. So the two-country model has three main problems. The first one is they're very difficult to teach. So imagine you're doing an undergrad class in macro, and you want to introduce an open economy model, and you got the Lavoie, which has 86 equations. An undergrad student looks at more than 20 equations and say, no, this is not for me. And so they go to a simple Munder-Fleming model with very few equations, or to some mainstream schools, and they will be happier than that. So Up to now, the benchmark, as I said, is the overpressure of the Lavoie, and Carnevale has simplified it a lot, so it cut out the number of equations down to 44. Still, very large model, quite complex to understand what's going on. So this is not a toy model in the sense of what Blanchard was saying some years ago. So during the macro wars after the financial crisis, Blanchard came up with a number of articles. And one of his points was that, I have a slide, say that in a minute. But in general, that we need two types of models, toy models and policy models. So policy models are something that we are presenting in this workshop. So the large scale stock-flow models, empirical models that we use for policy evaluation. So this is kind of what Blanchard says policy model. But a toy model is something that should be very simple to understand. It should be very simple to extend in different directions. It should be like a base starting point where I talk with other macroeconomists. So it should be minimal in size and in the number of assumptions. The second problem with this kind of literature, which comes with 2 or 3 or 4 country models, is that, especially if you're a master or PhD student, it becomes very difficult to design or implement something which is novel. Imagine you're starting your PhD, you want to study open economy issues, find that the frontier of the literature is already hundreds of models with hundreds of equations, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 countries. And so you have a very high entry barrier, so you get scared and maybe you will go to some other topic. In the same way, when the model is too complex, it's very difficult to understand what's going on. So you make a shot to simulate the model, you see some responses of some variables, but maybe there is some tricky stuff happening into this very large black box-ish model. And so it is not easy for someone outside of the literature to design and implement and understand what they're doing, especially at the master level. And finally, these 2 country models or multi-country models are based on bilateral financial holdings, which are non-existent in the data. So usually, if you want to take these kind of models to the empirics, you have to make a very large number of assumptions on this structure, the financial asset between the 2 countries, because you need to have bilateral holdings, which do not appear in financial accounts. So either you rely on external statistics, or you have to make a very large number of assumptions. But as I was saying, there is a simpler way. And the simpler way which I suggested to the student was this. So be like Coco Chanel, take out stuff. Simplify, simplify, simplify. So what I've done was to take, so again, I did already this. So as I was saying, I took Carnevale's point seriously. And so because we have seen that there is a very large increase in complexity in the stock-flow literature, so we have just saw George Adam model, it's becoming very, very complex. Of course, we can answer a lot of questions, but again, it becomes difficult to make it palatable for younger people, which need to enter into this literature and into this literature. So theory models have been blended in various ways. Starting from the Godwin-Lavoie chapter 12, we had extensions in the number of areas or countries that have been modeled. We started with 2 countries, and now we have up to 5 strong, with models made by Sebastian, by Jacques Massier, and by other people in the room. Then we had an extension, so take the chapter 12, and add mechanisms, add sectors, add financial assets, or other stuff to study particular research questions. So we have models with expectations by London Dagger, models to study precisely global imbalances, other models to study inequality or the ecology, and so on and so forth. And the same can be said about empirical models. So we have, in both kinds of literature stream, a push toward increasing complexity in what we're doing. But this, again, can be dangerous, especially from a pedagogical point of view. So what I do in this paper is that I take Carnevale's challenge to simplify this model further. So this is the original balance sheet from the AutoFlex from Godin Lavoie. And below you find the balance sheet from Carnevale's model. So they look very similar. So you have two countries, UK and US, exchange rate in the middle. You're going to see some very slight simplification between the two because gold and central bank reserves are not modeled by Carnevale. But what Carnevale shows is that with a much simpler structure, you retain he is able to retain all the results of the Godin Lavoie book without the equations. And so my plan was to do the same stuff. How to do it? By shutting down the second country, model it as an aggregate rest of the world, which is actually what Sebastian and Gennaro have done in three-country models, where you have area 1, area 2, rest of the world, which is aggregated. And this has a number of advantages. The first one is that it's much more simpler. The second is that you can use the balance sheet to imply some of the closures on the financial side. And third, it will be very simple to calibrate, to take into the data, because we know that financial accounts and financial accounts are built in this way with an aggregate rest of the world. So it will be very simple to bring the model to you. So the model is very simple. I'm taking all the assumptions for the Godin Lavoie. So this is a small open economy that we call UK, as in the tradition, and differently from Carnevale and when I aggregate in the private sector, so I don't have households and firms, but actually firms do not have that much action in Carnevale's model. So in the end, cutting down the firms sector doesn't make more harm. And in the end, the private expenditure function is the same as the consumption function. So in a model with no capital as in Carnevale or the Flex, the firm sector is almost irrelevant to be added. And this, so we have a domestic economy with three sectors, a private sector, government sector, and central bank, which interact with the rest of the world. So we have 4 sectors in total. The private sector holds all the financial assets. In this very simple model, we only have 3: high power money, domestic bills, and foreign bills. So, and all the wealth of the private sector is held in these 3 forms. The government issues bills, collect taxes, and so on and so forth. Of course, money is endogenous, so the monetary liability belongs to the central bank, which accommodates the demand for money coming from the household sector. And the rest of the world supplies bills as demanded by the private domestic sectors. Prices are fixed, and the exchange rate is the only relative price in the system. So these are the matrices. We don't need to go there into detail. There are some things that need work underline. The first one is that if you look here, the foreign bills line, you see that the foreign bills are valued at the current exchange rate. This implies in the asset function that the private sector decides a share of their wealth in their domestic currency to be invested into foreign bills. The second one is that we have the net part here, which is the net foreign assets of the country, which is the net international investment position. And finally, as usual, the central bank distributes all its profits so that the net wealth of the central bank is only related to monetary policy. Very quickly on the equations, these are the same equations that you find in Godin Lavoie, so the changes are very minimal. So we have disposable income and Simmons income, which also includes the valuation effect. Here, the delta X are part of the right-hand side. The private wealth, which accumulates given savings and expenditure, taxes, GDP as the sum of the main components. Private expenditure as the usual consumption function form. We can add other things, some the effects of the interest rate, but talking with generally, usually when you try to put the interest rate into this kind of equation, nothing happens. It's very difficult for them to have a meaningful effect. Then we have the external sector. Also, this is very classic. So export and import are in log linear form. So this is why the variables are involved. They depend on the exchange rate and on foreign and domestic income. Of course, export on foreign income, import on income. The trade balance is simply the difference between the two. The current account is made of the trade balance plus the interest streams on domestic and foreign bonds. Then you have the net foreign asset positions. What? I don't think we need the Puff Daddy now. Okay, great. And finally, we have the domestic bills held abroad in equation 13. And notice that these one are already residually determined from the balance sheet. So we already have one of the assets which is residually determined and simplifies a lot the model structure. Private portfolio is also very standard. So we have an asset demand function for private holding of domestic bills, for private holding of foreign bills, as I was saying before. Households choose foreign asset with wealth divided by the exchange rate, meaning that they decide to invest a share of the total wealth in foreign denominated bills, while the rest goes, while the bills itself are denominated in foreign goods. Finally, I think it's also standard that the lambdas related to the bills implies that a change in the interest rate will determine a specular shift in the portfolio holdings between the two types of bonds, domestic and foreign. Again, this is also very standard, government, central bank, and budget money creation. So, as I was saying, the central bank distributes all these interest rates back to the government. The holdings of the central bank are determined residually from the row of the balance sheet. This is also further simplification, but this is quite standard in SFC modeling. For example, this is the same closure that we use for our empirical model for Italy. So this is also something that you find in the literature. As in the model for Carnevali, money supply equals the CB holding, the central bank holding of domestic bills. Public deficit evolves given the public expenditure net of all the incomes of the government, so taxes and the flows of interest from the central bank. And they, as I was saying, issue bills to cover the deficit. And finally, the exchange rate. So this is the last equation of the model. So up to now, I guess only one of the other equation was different from Carnevali's version, but this is the biggest change with respect to the previous models. So in my model, so this is the current version. I had another version. So here, the exchange rate adjusts to current account imbalances. Very simple. If the current account is in, how do you say? So if it's in surplus, a tendency toward appreciation and a tendency toward depreciation if it's in deficit. Very simple mechanism. In the other two more complex models, the exchange rate had a much more complex mechanism. And this was due by the fact that you had two countries. And so they could use the demand functions from country two to determine the exchange rate of both countries. So, for example, in the model from Carnevali, you have the exchange rate determined from balance of payment identity. So you do have the current account, but we also have the shifts in the portfolio holdings, which are the two terms with the delta the delta bills of UK and US in the two countries. And in the same way, in the model, in the original model from Goblet-Lavoie, exchange rate determined as an asset clearing market price in equating instantaneously the supply and demand to for foreign bills. So this is a very simple representation from Evius. You read the stuff, it's just to see how the model has been simplified. So this is the open fact from Goblet-Lavoie, where this part is related to the prices. So the biggest simplification that the data has done with respect to the model was to shut down all the price block. So, the original model, we have price of imports, price of exports, so which is represented in this lower part of the graph, which is non-existent in Helios. And we also took out expectations, which were central in Broadway chapter 12. My model simplified it further. So I have all the missing mechanisms that Emilio has, plus some other ones. The first one is that, of course, I'm shutting down a technical economy. This means that I don't have explicit asset demand functions for the second country, because the second country is now just an aggregate and it's mostly residually driven. And the second, and then the different exchange rate closure. But as I will show you in a second, the results are the same. So really do all the shocks that appear in the Goblet-Lavoie chapter 12 and in the article by Emilio Carnevali. So the first example is step for the export of the UK. And this is very standard. So this is one of the reasons why their model was novel. So they challenged the Munder-Fleming type of discourse. Not much in this scenario, which is quite standard, but in this one, so the one about expansionary fiscal policy. So one of the main results of the Goblet-Lavoie model, and also the one from Carnevali, was that expansionary fiscal policy is indeed expansionary also in the case of an open economy. Why? Because the mainstream model, higher spending, the effects of higher spending are usually offset by higher interest rate, which implies an appreciation of the currency, but this does not happen in the SFC in this simple FFC model. So we retake initial results of expansionary fiscal policy, and we demonstrate that the fear of an appreciation of the currency that comes from mainstream theory is not true, because in the simulation we see that the selling exchange rate goes down. So we see a depreciation of the currency. And this is in fact so because once the current account moves, because of the increased spending by the government authority, then you have the exchange rate reinforces the mechanisms, and so we have expansionary effects in the long run. Then I have the simple example on a change in liquidity preference. So let's check what happens if domestic sector increases their preference for foreign bills. And this is run by changing one of the lambdas into the asset demand function. And again, the results mimic the one that you see in the OpenFlex and OpenSchema model. So the initial portfolio shift generates a depreciation in the short term. And this reflects the reallocation of the assets inside of the portfolio. But then this takes down the current account, and this puts pressure on the exchange rate. So that as time goes by, the exchange rate dynamics will be shaped by the current account adjustment. And we essentially gradually improve the current account, which leads to an appreciation in the currency. and a conversion of the exchange rate to a new higher level than before. And then there is the only scenario where the results are not exactly the same as in the OpenFlex model. So this is the scenario where we increase the interest rate in domestic economy.
This decrease.
Yes, decrease. It's expansion. Yes, sorry. So we reduce the interest rate on domestic assets, and contrary to what happens in the original model, we have a direct appreciation currently. Why this is so? Because in this simple model, where the exchange rates only respond to current account imbalances, what is dominant in determining the movement of the exchange rate is the interest flows that are determined by the change in interest rate. So we have a reduction in the interest rate. This creates a surplus in the current account, and then the adjustment. Whereas in the Godley and Lavoie model and in the model from Carnevali, you had this initial depreciation. So you have an initial depreciation followed by an appreciation later on. So in the OpenFlex, this first depreciation and afterward appreciation happen in other number of periods. In the model from Carnevali, this is very short. So the figure will look like something like this. Selling exchange rate responding way faster. This, of course, has an effect on the current account. The current account is in the very first period goes down very deeply, then rebound afterwards. So I do believe in the story, so that changes in portfolio structure do have an effect, an immediate effect on the exchange rate. But then I went back to the model, the code, and I what it is. First one is that if the interest rate shock is high enough, both models are meaning that if you try to simulate a shock like 1%, 2% of the interest rate, an increase or more than 1%, this response is too large, so the model expects. The second problem is that this dynamic only happens the very first period. So my question is, how relevant? Second, is it true that this effect exists? How can we say so? Do we have empirical evidence for this kind of mechanism, or what we are really interested in for medium run? Because the medium run effects are the same. If you have the medium run, we have an appreciation currency, and then the overall policy is recessionary. But I guess that this is something that we will have to investigate empirically more than theoretically in this kind of model. So I guess I concluded. So the purpose of this article was mainly pedagogical. So my heading to start a tenure position and started thinking about teaching a bit more. And since my plan, at least, is to try to teach heterodox macro, we have to make it simple enough for undergrad and master students to understand it, so that at the PhD level, someone which already has some solid basis to further go and make the complex model that we are all discussing in these 3 days. So, as I showed, we can mimic most of the important results from more complex structure with a minimal set of equations. And the idea for future works is to have other 3 papers. The first one will be how can we calibrate this simple model to have a representation of different countries. So up to now, we have a country which starts with export higher than imports, but the current account is on balance because of interest payments. But changing the calibration, we can have export-led models. wage-led models, profit-led models, whatever, but just by changing the initial conditions and the initial calibration. The second one will be to have another paper that shows how to simply extend the model in simple ways. So first way would be adding sectors or adding assets. And if one wants to go deeper, you can always go back to the OpenFlex and add stuff on there. But this will be, I think, important, especially at the master level. Think of a master student who wants to do a thesis. This is something that they can do by themselves. Okay, take this very simple stuff and extend it in some ways that could be interesting for you. And finally, something which I feel is needed is to write another paper on how to calibrate the stuff using national accounts data. Because this is something that we all do, but it's not written on paper. So this is also a very tall entry barrier for younger students that want to do empirical SFC stuff, but don't have how to guide. So that was all. Thank you very much. Well,
On the discussion, and thanks, Francesco, for providing me your brilliant paper.